Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Roberts, and I am a faculty member in the History of Art and Architecture at Harvard, and also the faculty director for the arts here at Radcliffe. Welcome to the opening celebration of our exhibition of Dario Robleto's work, Unknown and Solitary Seas, Dreams and Emotions of the 19th Century. I'm thrilled to see the size of this crowd. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to come out here this evening. I'm just going to give you a quick preview of the program and how this will work. It's a little bit complicated topographically, so I thought I'd let you know what's going to happen before we get started. So I'm going to be starting the program with 15 to 20 minutes worth of introductions and thank yous, an overview of the exhibition, of the research project that sits behind the exhibition, and then also the broader arc of Dario's work that brings him here with us. Then I'm going to have the honor of bringing our two remarkable guests to the stage. First, of course, Dario, who is not just our visiting artist, but also a visiting scholar at Radcliffe for the next few weeks. He will be around until November 20th, so if you don't get hold of him later this evening, you can probably find him wandering around Radcliffe over the next few weeks. And Dr. Doris Taylor of the Texas Heart Institute, who will join us in a conversation about the relationship in past and future between artistic and scientific models of the human heart. We'll talk for about 45 minutes, hopefully winding down the program at around 6 or soon thereafter. There will be no official Q&A here in this room because the hope is that there'll be a lively discussion among all the audience members and with the artist and with Dr. Taylor at the reception and in the gallery afterwards. So we're going to do the reception a little bit differently than we've done it in the past here. The reception will be downstairs in this building. Just go down the stairs and staff will show you the way to the reception. And then the gallery is 2 buildings down in Byerly Hall, and staff members can guide you there as well. So the plan is that we'll go straight down to the reception and then people can filter into the gallery. The reason for this sort of progressive party method tonight is that our registration numbers sort of far exceeded the actual physical capacity of our gallery space, and we can't, according to fire codes, all of you into the gallery at once. I like to think that we have big discussions and big ideas and big hearts here at the Radcliffe, but a very small gallery. All right. So when you go into the gallery, you're going to see that it is full of emotions and experiences captured in the 19th century as waveforms, and then transformed by Robleto into 21st century art. Here, for example, is Excitement from 1886. Now, putting on an art exhibition is exciting, complex, intricate, and a terrifying kind of operation. And as we pulled all this together over the past year or so, I often found myself processing the experience through the waveform vocabulary that we were developing for the exhibition. I found a waveform to correspond to virtually every emotional condition that accompanied the development of this show. There was excitement, fear, exhaustion, faith, taking involuntary deep breaths while solving multiplication problems, and eating chocolate. There's been a lot of that. But there wasn't a waveform in the show for gratitude, and when all this shakes out, this is what I'm feeling more than anything else at the moment, so I wanted to take a few minutes to express my deepest thanks to everyone who made this very complex exhibition and set of programs possible. Thanks most of all, of course, to Dario Robleto for his commitment, his patience, his passion, and his outright brilliance in putting this show together. Thanks to Dr. Taylor for being here, and for all the ways that your work has directly and indirectly shaped Dario's work, and therefore also this exhibition. Thanks to the entire staff at the Radcliffe Institute, they've worked so incredibly hard across multiple different units and divisions to coordinate all of this. Thanks to Rachel Vogel for editing the catalog and her many other intellectual contributions, John Kramer for designing the catalog. Special thanks to Cary Inman of Inman Gallery in Houston and Lisa Corin of the Block Museum of Art at Northwestern for their intellectual and material generosity towards this show, and I'm very honored that you're both here tonight with us. The Radcliffe is the newest member of an evolving contemporary art ecosystem at Harvard. And I also want to thank my colleagues in the contemporary art world across campus for their support and encouragement for everything that we do here at Radcliffe, particularly Mary Schneider Enriquez, Narayan Kandekar, Ethan Lasser, and Elizabeth Rudy at the Harvard Art Museums, Bree Edwards of the Harvard Art Lab, and Dan Byers of the Carpenter Center for the Visual Arts. And I also want to extend a special thanks to someone who couldn't be here in person, but very much in spirit tonight, Dr. Callum McRae of the Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, who helped bring Dr. Taylor here to us this evening. McRae is a leader in the One Brave Idea initiative, which is a team devoted to breaking down boundaries in the biomedical sciences at Harvard and throughout the Boston area. And I'm just thrilled to be able to say that a team devoted to breaking down the biomedical boundaries is helping support an art exhibition here at Radcliffe. So Dario's work in this exhibition has developed along with and out of an extensive research program stretching across multiple different archives into the history of recording and visualizing the human heart. Here, he's focusing on the origins and the really staggering implications of the 19th century development of the pulse wave as a graphic expression of internal life. Everything I'm about to say as historical background is actually something that I owe to Dario's own research and exploring this research along with him. I often joke with him that he's such a good researcher that he's left me nothing to do as an art historian. I've tried to make a few contributions here and there, but much of this comes out of Dario's own curiosity and his own work. So over the latter half of the 19th century in Europe, scientific instruments were developed that could take that subtle, elusive throbbing of the pulse in the body and translate it into a visible waveform. Devices called sphygmographs captured the movements of the pulse at the wrist, the chest, and even in the brain, and transferred them to a sheet of paper wrapped around a moving cylinder. This created a linear trace in time that fixed an image of the pulse as a waveform. These are the first direct recordings of the living, beating human heart, and in cases such as this, where the pulse in the brain is being recorded, we can also see them as the first examples of what we would recognize today as neuroimaging. In order to coax such subtle traces out of the body, these devices had to be incredibly delicate, incredibly sensitive. The paper was covered with a thin layer of soot from a candle flame or a lamp flame, and the waveform was traced into it by a stylus made of a single human hair. The physiologists that developed these devices felt that they had awakened a new kind of direct bodily language and writing. The sphygmograph was described as the pulse armed with a pen. And the books in which these pulse waves were published presented themselves as if they were books written directly by the heart itself. And in doing this, scientists hoped that they had revealed a new kind of universal language, one that could theoretically be understood by everyone and therefore heal all the damage of Babel. Many of them also hoped that they had finally found a way to disentangle scientific knowledge from the religious, emotional, and literary modes that had governed knowledge of the heart up until that time. These waveforms then mark a kind of watershed moment in the history of the cultural and medical understanding of the heart. Sacred Hearts, Valentines would peel off in one direction, hospital monitors and medical charts would move in the other. We might say that each waveform that was pulled out of a 19th century body helped establish and perpetuate the deep disciplinary divisions between the arts and sciences that we still inhabit today. So Dario's work returns us to this 19th century moment when the pulse wave is being developed, to the origins of these forms, to the origins of what we might see as this crisis between the arts and the sciences. He acknowledges their promise, their profundity, their scientific value, but he also reclaims some of their ambiguity and asks us to wonder whether we can or should accept that these waveforms have escaped the realms of art, culture, and emotional communication. He also asks us to consider the uneasy implications that flowed from their development. So after all, these 19th century waveform technologies are what led to so much of the voracious clinical data collection of today and all of the intense debates that have sprung up around those. So these 19th century questions are still very much with us. And these waveforms do come down to us bearing many more questions than they do answers, questions that are still highly relevant to us today. Who were the subjects that bequeathed these pulses to us? What kind of experimental conditions did they experience? And how should we recover or remember them as individuals through these abstract data traces? How can we develop more heartfelt ways of inheriting and interpreting medical data? What kind of language does the body write? What is its relationship to the verbal languages that surround it? And once pulse writing is separated from the body, in whose interests does it speak? Can and should we attempt to reconcile artistic and scientific representations of emotional experience? Over the course of his research into the pulse wave and its history, Dario has visited multiple different medical archives in multiple countries, seeking out the earliest pulse waves that he can find that capture a variety of different kinds of emotional and somatic experiences. Most of the recordings that were made during this period were concerned specifically with disease. So there are many that feature sort of pathological stresses like exhaustion or pneumonia, and there are, of course, flat lines as a certain kind of pulse wave. But Dario was also interested in what he calls the outlier recordings in these medical archives, in which scientists tried to see what everyday, humble, routine experiences look like in this new language of waveforms. These two are in the gallery, and they create a kind of poignant atlas of thoroughly relatable everyday 19th century experiences. So we have hiccups, drinking hot milk, smelling lavender, and unease at the prospect of going to the dentist. So as is probably already fully evident from looking at the slides I've been showing, these waveforms have undergone a series of intensive transformations in Dario's work. He has rendered them materially active in the present, made them bristle with connective conceptual tissue to those of us in the audience today. So first, I'm just going to take you through the three main kinds of objects that are in the gallery next door. First, there are the prints. He made these in collaboration with Lisa Belowski and Tom Reed at Island Press in St. Louis. For these prints, and this is one example, the historical waveform was first printed onto white paper in transparent ink. Then Dario hand-sooted each impression by sweeping a burning candle a few inches below the paper surface, covering the paper with a swirl of smoky gesture. Then he went back in with tiny paintbrushes, and these must have been just 2 or 3 hair paintbrushes, soaked in solvent, and carefully excavated the pulse wave line back out of the layer of soot. And when you see how tiny these lines are in the gallery, you will realize what an enormous endeavor this actually was. So these prints are, in a way, then a kind of partial reenactment of their original 19th century mode of capture and inscription. But here they've also recovered all of the tenuous and uncertain quality of the 19th century moment when they were made. They balance between legibility and obscurity. They seem to inhabit the ground and the air simultaneously. There are 4 boxes like this, sculptural boxes, in the gallery, holding collections of waveforms that have been painstakingly rendered and 3D printed in brass-plated stainless steel, set in meticulously crafted boxes with hand-gilded lettering. Dario has been complaining about having gold leaf all over himself for the past few weeks. I think you've got it all off by now. But this was an elaborate and very complicated process of gold leafing. Here the waveforms become like precious sacred objects. And in having expanded or dilating the waveforms from these 2-dimensional lines into a 3rd dimension, it's almost as if the waveforms have begun to take on some of the character of the blood vessels that originally produced them, as if they were a kind of vascular sculpture. And in showing this 3D rendering, I wanted to mention that these were made in collaboration with the designer David Richmond of Houston, and I'm very happy to say that he's come up this evening for the opening. I'm very eager to talk to him about this process. I'm glad he's here. So as such, in their sort of vascular quality, these sculptural forms also participate in the long history of Western sculpture's experiments with re-enlivenment, their attempt to imply life and animacy from inert matter. And then finally, the last mode of reconstitution that we'll see in the gallery are, in collaboration with Patrick Feaster, the pulse waves have been reverse engineered back into sound waves so that when you're standing in the gallery, you will be able to hear and feel in your own body the low frequency sounds of blood pulsing through these 19th century bodies. I don't have a slide of this, obviously, but the sound waves are actually carried by a new video, and the ink is barely dry on this video, so this is the debut of this brand new work by Dario. But this return to sound is a kind of, we might say, empathetic transplantation that serves as a material form of memory. It too is very complex and ambiguous, since it also raises all these questions about the line between interiority and exteriority, privacy and publicity that all of these waveforms have been involved with from the very beginning. So in his 20-year career as an artist so far, there have been two central motifs or themes that I want to introduce to you because they have a very particular form of relevance for everything that's going on in the gallery now. The first motif is the record, or more broadly, the practice and philosophy of recording. Much of Dario's work has explored the strange intersection of materiality and ephemerality that defines the structure of memory in sound recording, particularly, in his case, vinyl recording. You have these ephemeral phenomena brushing up against matter, leaving a trace that can then bring those ephemeralities back to life later. What else can be recovered from those traces? What if you experiment with different kinds of playback of those sounds? And while I'm on the topic of recording, I just would point out that the root word core, C-O-R, in the term record or recording comes from the Latin for heart. In early works like this one, Dario used melted or pulverized records, always particular tracks or albums, as artistic media. He devised new methods of playback for them, testing the ability of the material to pass along the memory of the song, even if its grooves are ground down and reorganized into another context for meaning. And this issue of pulverization and recasting is something that I think you'll see is quite relevant for our future discussion here with Dr. Taylor. Those of you who remember the 90s, of course, and the travails of Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love will appreciate this one. But I would just ask you to notice in particular with this piece, the emphasis on recording as a mode of connection or emotional linkage. Another favorite of mine is the so-called Patsy spool of 1998, where he took a 45 RPM I Fall to Pieces single, sliced along the outer rim until reaching the center, and then reconnected it into one long thread and spooled it. This is a song about falling to pieces, but it's been spooled into an object that's associated with mending and connection. You Make My World a Better Place to Find, one of his earliest works from 1996 to 98. This builds on the Patsy spool. The second motif, the second key motif that I want to bring up here, lurking behind everything he's done here is the spool. So the record and the spool. And I'll just read the description, which is sort of like the materials list for this work. For the past 2 years, I've been secretly collecting lint, thread, etc. from other people. For example, a piece of lint on someone's shoulder, a hair hanging on a forearm. I connected this debris into one long thread, which I then spooled. From this spool of debris, I repaired a blanket, a tiny pair of mittens, sewed buttons back on, repaired tears in clothes, and various other things. I see these pieces of lint and hair gathering along the edges of people as something like the 19th century pulse waves in the gallery, delicate hair-drawn threads hovering in that liminal space between inside and outside, capturing maybe something essential about the individuals that bore them. Collecting these pulse pieces in the gallery, Dario has, we might say, spooled them back together in a gesture of connection, tethering, and ultimately, hopefully, repair. One of the things that Dario is especially keen to repair is the split between the arts and the sciences, and this should be quite evident just from looking at all the work I've been showing, but it's been part of his career from the outset. And in order to move into a larger discussion about the split and potential repair between the arts and the sciences, I want to get started on our discussion where we can continue thinking about how the heart might be a really good place to begin that discussion. So let me introduce our speakers in a more official way and then bring them up. Along with everything I've already said about Dario, I'll add that he received his BFA from the University of Texas at San Antonio in 1997. His work is held in prominent collections, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Hirshhorn Museum, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and the Menil Collection. He calls himself a transdisciplinary artist, and he can definitely back that up. To give just one example, he has got to be the only artist who has been a research fellow and artist at residence at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, the Smithsonian Museum of American History, and the Space Telescope Science Institute. All this transdisciplinary moxie has guided the way he works with institutions across the country. In fact, at the moment, he is serving as the first artist at large at Northwestern University, where he moves between the McCormick School of Engineering and the Block Museum of Art. Northwestern, by the way, has really devised an excellent model for artists serving as disciplinary connectors, and it's one that we should all be emulating. Hint, hint. So Dario lives and works in Houston, and let me just say that I'm so glad to have so many people from Houston here this evening. This is sort of like Houston night at the Radcliffe, and I'm really thrilled about this. Our special guest is Dr. Doris Taylor, who is Director of Regenerative Medicine Research and Director of the Center for Cell and Organ Biotechnology at the Texas Heart Institute and Texas A&M University in Houston. Dr. Taylor earned her BS from Mississippi University for Women in Biology and Physical Sciences and her PhD in Pharmacology from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. She did her postdoctoral studies at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx, where she first worked with tissue engineering, growing heart muscle cells in the laboratory. She was on the faculty of Duke University from 1991 to 2007, the faculty of the University of Minnesota from 2003 to 2012, and joined the Texas Heart Institute in 2012. Dr. Taylor and her lab have pioneered the field of total bioartificial heart design. She's best known for the so-called ghost heart, which you see at the right on the screen. And we'll talk more about this, but let me quickly introduce you to what you're looking at. This is a heart that's been washed clean of cells so that only its extracellular matrix remains behind. And the extracellular matrix is like a bioscaffold that is actually secreted by the cells, sort of collagen-based secretions, as the cells grow and mature in the heart. In her landmark research, she's working to grow new hearts by repopulating these structures with stem cells. She's discovered that this extracellular matrix is not just an inert container. Rather, it's a generative, bioactive meshwork that cues heart cells to develop properly and to communicate themselves and to coordinate themselves into a working community. Dario has been in conversation with Dr. Taylor for the past several years, and I'm very glad to have them both here talking with us this evening. One final question before I bring them up would simply just be, why would we want to muse about a this is a real tongue twister, a decellularized heart at an art opening? Not only, I think, is it a highly provocative object from an artistic standpoint, it's something between a drawing and a diagram and a sculpture. It seems caught between form and content. It seems to be unsure whether it's an idea or matter. But also, like any great work of art, it pushes out beyond our current field of language and our epistemic constructs. It compels us to reorganize our ideas about embodiment, identity, life, death, and our relationships to other beings. So her heart, like all the hearts in Dario's work, is a heart that changes the mind. Please join me in welcoming Dario Robleto and Doris Taylor to the stage. All right. Thank you both for being here again. I'm very excited about this. I love a good interdisciplinary conversation, but this is by far the most interdisciplinary conversation that I've ever even considered moderating. So this will be a great challenge.
And thank you, Jennifer. That was an amazing intro. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so I thought we would just start with this question of the transdisciplinary and how it actually happens and how such conversations get started. It seems to me that truly radical interdisciplinarity implies that the parties in this discussion are coming from totally different places, that they are inherently strangers to each other. They come from different communities of thinking and doing. So there's always a kind of risky moment of approach that comes about in an initial attempt at building a connection. And I've been thinking in terms of heart transplantation that there's some useful metaphors for thinking about that. So if you're going to reach out, if you're an artist and you're reaching out to a scientist, is this person going to recognize you or reject you? And recognition and rejection, I think, are useful to think about not only in terms of heart transplantation, but our entire social world at the moment. But I just thought I would start by asking you both to talk a little bit about how you got to know each other. Maybe the simplest way to express this is, Dario, why did you knock on Doris's door? And Doris, why did you answer it?
Well, thank you for having me, and that was a beautiful introduction. I can't really stress enough how excited I am to have both these brilliant thinkers here, and that I get to be part of it is amazing. That I get to be friends with them is amazing to me. I never lose sight of that. And the friendship thing is, I'll jump in.
Please.
It's been a big part of my career, my life, to try to break down silos, ways of thinking, and to really make a case why we should be talking across disciplines and not simply patting each other on the back and sort of feeling good that we made the effort, but sustained long-term change that matters on both sides. And in my experience, that's been a really hard thing to do. I've never had a scientist knock on my door yet. I'm always doing the knocking. It's just totally fine. I like it. I embrace it. But all this to say that in my experience, Dr. Taylor's openness from day one to have a conversation is startling and stunning, and I think worth exploring more, because you've now become the standard bearer to me for who I want to do this type of work with, because you're clearly open-minded in a way that I don't want to speak out of turn, but that scientists generally maybe would not have as a general impression of being as willing for cross-collaboration in the sense the arts and humanities are. I know there are exceptions to that, of course, but why did I knock on your door, which we're going to elaborate on, because the ghost heart is something that has just reordered my thinking. It has asked me to tackle some very problematic questions about identity and form, which you know a lot, we've talked a lot about, which we'll unpack. But it was a quest to understand the heart, and in every possible way. And your work has made me ask questions I never thought I would ask. So that's why I initially knocked. I didn't know if you'd respond, but you have, and here we are. So anyway, that's why I initially knocked on your door.
And here we are.
Yeah.
And you know, when you first asked it, well, first of all, I've never met an idea I didn't want to discuss. You know, I mean, basically. So it's easy to, but at the same time, you bring beauty and intellectual curiosity to a conversation at a level that, frankly, sometimes is even a little intimidating to me as an academician. I've never met someone who is as rigorous intellectually as you are, who is not an academician. Now, I would say, and then there was the whole piece of friendship. You know, a friend introduced me to you, and she knew how I thought, she knew how you thought, and she kept telling me that you're going to love this guy. There's so much you two need to talk about. And wow.
Yeah. It's that broadly curious behavior. And I immediately saw that in you too. There, like you said, we could talk about a rock on the side of the street, I'm sure, for an hour in some interesting way.
And sometimes we have.
Yeah. So, but what I just, one last point is just, because I've become very sensitive to how to do this work, especially talking to younger artists. And I always want to tap into my collaborators' sense of broad curiosity. And that was very easy with you because you are. But as I've learned, I shouldn't assume that from everyone. People can get very specialized and for good reason, but it's broad curiosity that I really champion across disciplines, and you're a shining example of that. So anyway, thank you for that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me here. The one other thing I want to say that I think we both love is making what we do accessible to everyone. And I think that came across immediately, that you don't want to go do art in a corner and be erudite about it, and even though you could, you want to make it accessible to everyone, and that's how I feel about science and medicine.
And it's part of that kind of accessibility, I think, has to be part of any interdisciplinary discussion, because you can't have a meaningful discussion across the disciplinary aisles without having a certain humility about your own language and your own vocabulary. So that's something that we're trying to model here too at the Radcliffe every day in the way we work with interdisciplinarity. So it's great to have you modeling this for us. Let's move on to some more detailed discussion about the ghost heart, just to introduce everyone to what's happening with this extremely strange and wonderful object. I thought I would start with, this is a slide showing the ghost heart next to a more traditional model of an artificial heart. And I wanted to just start by asking you, Doris, about the metaphor of the heart as a complicated pump, or the model of the heart as a complicated pump. This phrase, complicated pump, is one of those constructs that did a great deal to split the arts and sciences apart from each other in the Enlightenment, when it was argued that the heart was not, as it had previously been understood, the space of identity, of a kind of area where the spiritual and the material and identity would come together, but rather was instead essentially a mechanical object. This is the moment where cardiocentrism gives way to craniocentrism, and the brain is understood to do all the work, and the heart just mechanically follows the brain's direction. How do you feel about this? Are you making a complicated pump?
Are we making a pump? Yes. Are we making a complicated pump? Absolutely, unequivocally. Are we only making a complicated pump? No. If it were simply a complicated pump, the device on the right would work. And it would work all the time, and it would never fail, and it wouldn't cause other physiologic issues. And the reality is, what taught me this more than anything was when we were trying to do cell therapy in the heart. And what we realized very quickly is you put cells in and they last 2 days, but they have an effect 2 years later. And what that says to me is that we are moving way beyond simply the concept of a pump. Maybe it's back. That we're moving way beyond simply the concept of the biology of a pump. Complicated pump, some days so complicated that I'm not even sure what I'm going to do.
Dario's talked a little bit about the scene in Houston in the 60s when the quest to get a man on the moon was accompanied by a quest to create a successful artificial heart. And maybe you could follow up on that.
Well, I think what a vivid way of thinking about it is, the moon mission, the Apollo program, very clear mission statement. America's going to get to the moon. We're going to do it by the end of the decade. What's not quite as remembered is that a similar thing was said for the heart a few years later, under the same kind of Cold War language of, if any country is going to build a heart from scratch, it's going to be America, and we can do it by the end of the decade. But think of this, it's 2019. What if we still had not made it to the moon? Just think of psychologically what that may have done to our country, and yet what we don't largely realize is that that's what happened with the heart. Certainly mechanical hearts have been made and many are successful, but the stated goal from day one was a fully transferable, transplantable artificial heart, put it in a person and let them go live the rest of their life in a meaningful, healthy way. And then by that standard, we're still not there. And that has been a fascinating thing for me to think that if you ask most people what's more difficult, to get on the moon or build a complicated pump, I think we'd say a complicated pump, but it's just not true at some level, because we have made it to the moon, obviously. We're going to get back there again, probably before we've still finished this problem, which is why what Dr. Taylor's doing, and please take over here, to give a bit of historical background to why did you pursue this line of thinking with the ghost heart, and maybe a little more background on the ghost heart too.
Well, the concept of the ghost heart was that we needed to maybe think about how nature had done it. And I could spend the next 50 years of my life trying to figure out how to build something, or we could take advantage of what nature had already done and use the scaffold that nature had created. And actually, in my lab, we were doing cell therapy. We were transplanting cells into the heart. And what we said is, wouldn't it be really cool if we could wash the sick cells out and put healthy cells back in? So here's the process. We normally would actually let a solution drip down into the heart and break down this scaffold and give us the cells. And then we said, let's do it the other way around. Let's drip a solution in, soap. It's basically the equivalent of baby shampoo, which scares me at a whole different level, right? But we put that through the blood vessels of the heart, and the cells actually get washed out. And when they get washed out, what's left is the framework. But it's this beautiful, gorgeous framework that has all the blood vessels still there, and that's what's been missing. Here's when we transplanted one of those hearts, and we let go, we unclamped the aorta, and you can see the blood flowing in. Nature is amazing. It knows how to do this. And I wasn't going to figure it out. I wasn't going to spend 20 more years of my life trying to figure out how to build it when nature had already done it for us.
There's also, one of the things I'm so, as Jennifer mentioned, it's an incredible thing to look at. It's just a beautiful object that I'm trying to do that every day in my studio. And when I saw what you were making, I just couldn't believe that it satisfied all these deep desires I have when I look at art. And I'd love to dig into that more, but one of the things that is startling and beautiful is that you've done this thing where you revealed something sort of hiding in plain sight. Literally everybody in the room right now has a ghost heart in them, and as well as ghost kidneys and ghost hands and ghost lungs. And this beautiful architecture in the body that the cells, like a seashell, is like creating its own home by secretion. I find that so beautiful.
Well, and you said hiding in plain sight. The reason there's a hand up there is because an orthopedist came to me and said, we have no idea what the inside of the hand looks like. We don't know because all we can do is take the skin off, and when we do, we lose everything that's in the connections that are inside. Can you decell a hand for us and let us look at it differently than we ever have?
Decel is the slang version of that.
Easier to say.
Decell, resell. Story of my life.
Can you talk a little bit about what the relationship is between the stem cells that you put back into the structure and the structure itself? Because it isn't, as I said, it's not just an inert form. There's a sense in which it's like this diagrammatic skeleton of the heart, and we imagine it, therefore, to be inert, and yet it's actually very active in helping organize the cells.
I mean, you can see in this picture here on the top, the cells are missing. And it looks, to me, it always reminds me of a tube of toothpaste where you just squeeze and the cells were extruded. And then when you put the cells back in, unlike a tube of toothpaste, if I tried to stuff, the cells get these cues, they go back, they migrate to the right places. And if we add physiology back, if we add a blood pressure, if we add a pacemaker and make it electrically and mechanically active like a heart, they go to the right place. I call it a smart heart because the scaffold knows how to guide the cells. And again, it's humbling. It's humbling because we don't really know what we're doing every day when we put those cells back in there. We just know that if we get it right and add back the right physiology, that the cells start getting mature and they start acting like blood vessel cells and heart muscle cells. And
this is why it's so intriguing, as an artist looking at that and just listening to everything you said. I'm hearing it on biological terms, as you're saying, while also hearing one of the most interesting form-function questions I've ever encountered because, of course, of what's at stake, which is life. Right. And for the matrix to, again, like Jennifer said, I don't even know what the language is exactly, but what you've taught me, and I find so beautiful, is that they need each other in some there's a deep relationship between the cell and the secretion it's making. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, if you think about it, heart cells in a dish will beat.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I have this video. It's one of the most beautiful things you ever showed me. I have the second one too, but you want to tell them what this one is? Well, this, from as I understand from what you told me, these heart cells in a petri dish, which is just a fascinating thing to behold as itself. But there's some critical threshold where these are clearly not working in the way they should. They're out of tune, they're out of sync.
Right.
But you get a critical threshold, and in a petri dish, the cells will be a heart.
Well, they'll beat.
In the sense that they'll beat, yeah.
They'll beat. They'll beat. They'll even beat together, and you can get a wave of electricity. But again, but what enables them to do that in a dish is they secrete their own scaffold, right? And if they didn't or couldn't, they wouldn't connect with each other.
It's so beautiful. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, as the art historian on the stage, I would just say that this is so fascinating to me from so many different subfields within the arts. I mean, I know there are some architects in the audience, and I hope you're also having your minds blown by this idea of a kind of modular, secreted residential structure built for heart cells that organizes them, nurtures them, creates a space for community. I'm a print scholar, and the idea of a matrix is something that I think a great deal about. Matrix comes from the Latin for mother or womb. It's a way of thinking about a structure that can, pass life along in a very active and generative way rather than the more passive way that we normally think about the relationship between a structure and life. And then, any number of other ways that this messes with our heads in the arts. It's kind of like a diagram, like a linear formation, but it's also a fully detailed kind of trace of of every cell that was once in that heart. So,
I just want to make an exclamation point on this image. This is the electron microscope of the matrix itself, which the matrix was discovered, and then you keep peering down further, and these are the slots the cells will find their home in,
Right.
which is beautiful to think at that level of detail. The cells are slotting in this honeycomb-like way. But the way they tug on that form is also a relay system, a communication system to cells on the other side of the heart, in a way. And again, I'm being poetic here about the interpretation, but that's why I guess I'm here to do that. And but the notion that cells at this level need a sense of touch, need a sense of cuddling almost, a type of touch in the right way at the right time to initiate what they want to be. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. And what differentiates a healthy cell from a cancer cell? A healthy cell, when it gets surrounded on all sides, stops dividing, says, oh, I've got all the contact I need, I'm done. A tumor cell says, I don't care, get out of my way, I'm growing bigger. And contact inhibition. The cells get their cues from where they find themselves in 3D space. And this matrix provides that, but it also helps orient the cells in the proper way. Mm-hmm. And
even like with the stem cells, it even nudges them which type of cell to become, correct?
Well, when we put cells in the atria, mm-hmm. in the matrix, they look like atrial cells. We put them in the ventricle, the beating chamber, they look more like ventricle cells. And we can put immature cells in, and if we don't give them a blood pressure and the physiology they need, they'll kind of stay a little bit indifferent. It unfortunately says that exercise matters, Bummer.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess food, shelter, and exercise is what they need. Yeah. Well, you want to add something?
Right.
I wanted to move to give you an opportunity, Dario, to say just a little bit more about your response to the ghost heart, what it did to you when you first saw it. You have said that the ghost heart satisfies every criteria that you would expect from a great work of art, and maybe you could explain
It really has.
what you mean by that.
And I'd love to show a video. Just briefly, I'll come back to this, but the way we started our conversation about how we work together, how we find a way to work together, I just want to say, for a scientist of your caliber, to let an artist into your lab to to seriously look for non-scientific reasons, even just to look. And the video that I saw is this, and I'll just let you watch this real quick, because it really changed me. It's one of the most fascinating and definitely most emotional things I've ever seen. This is a heart washed clean, and all the connotations that means of its cells, its pure form, hovering in space, made to beat again. And it's one of the most complicated things I've ever witnessed. As an object, it's stunningly beautiful. Here's another image of it lit a little differently. But it does, so just at a visual level, it's fascinating. I don't understand quite what I'm seeing. How can this be? All those sorts of things. But it goes much further, and something that I'm particularly interested in, and you know this, is my question is, have you found the fundamental form of the heart? And I say that in a poetic way, but I also really mean it, in the sense that at a material level, it doesn't seem there's one more step to go in reduction as far as still retaining something of what it was. And so you've made me think of, in a very deep way, about form and identity. And knowing that, for example, one of the big problems with transplantation is at the level of you put in somebody else's organ in your body, and your body definitely knows that's not you. But you put the matrix in, and it's been fascinating for me to think, would there be a type of form rejection? I don't know. It's just an interesting thing to keep thinking, where's the demarcation line of where something about you is still embedded in not just the cell, but the form itself.
And I look forward to finding that out. But one of the things that is true is that the composition of the matrix is fairly preserved across species. So it's not really, we can take scaffold from a pig, we can take scaffold from a rat, we can take scaffold from a rabbit, and we can put human cells on those. And there is no negative interaction between those. They recognize that form even if it's a different species. Mm-hmm. So I think the form, I mean, again, it's why I'm not 3D printing this. Nature has evolved this form because it works, right? And I can spend a lot of time trying to reproduce it in a way that isn't as exquisite. There are hundreds of proteins there, and they're different in every single region. And unless I'm going to map that and rebuild that, and fortunately, there are people who have that level of patience. I don't. I want to see it work, and that's where I'm going for.
And just a reminder, why, I hope it's obvious, but just a quick reminder, why are you doing this work? It's still... I
want to make a difference in the world. And every 10 minutes, another person goes on the organ transplant list. Every 10 minutes. And there are not enough organs to go around. And I grew up in Mississippi, and my mom always told us we could change the world if we wanted to. And I want to make a difference in the world for people with disease, and I want to do it in my lifetime. And I think not the shortcut, but I think the direct path to getting there is learning from what already exists and taking the tools that already exist and using them. And we've talked about this in the past, but one of the things that I think is so exquisite about this is we have the opportunity to think about building this heart. I don't have to just figure out the physicality of it. The physicality is already there. So I can start thinking about, how do I make it real? And how do I make it something that works at a physical level, at a spiritual level, at every level? And one of the things that's controversial, and I apologize in advance to anyone who's offended by what I say, but we get some of these hearts from animals. And yet, part of my belief system is that what I need to do is thank those animals for their part in this process. But it's really about building hearts at the emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical level that I think is going to get them to work, because you have to babysit them 24/7, 365. They're like your kids. They want to eat every day. They want to eat all the time. When they get temperamental, you have to build an artificial body to put them in. You have to give them oxygen. You have to keep them warm. You have to, all of that. And you can't do that if you're not passionate about it at every level. And that's what I think makes this cooler than any other research.
Just picture in your head, just everything she just said, that, I don't know how many hearts you have in these vats at any one time, but just that image of, it takes the idea of caring for another's heart into this strange place that I am so deeply moved by. Like I said, when you let me just watch that one beating, and knowing that, just temporarily I was there and it moved me. I can't imagine the care every day you must deal with on all these hearts, and you become attached to them.
And the devastation if one gets infected.
It's so, oh my God. So it's...
So I mean, this is actually a really great moment to break in with a discussion of metaphor and the relationship of your super advanced scientific research to the long history of understanding the heart culturally and artistically. We've been living in a world where the primary metaphor for the heart is the complicated pump or the factory or some mechanical model. And one of the things that's struck me about your work is that it's stirring up all of these old discarded metaphors from earlier centuries that govern the way we thought about the heart. So the heart as a house was a really standard Christian model. The heart as a space for nurturing and communion, in this case between the spiritual and the material. This is my favorite. This is an engraving that we might call kind of early broom-based form of decellularization.
Why do you think we use soap?
Exactly. Scrubbing the heart clean. And not to say that you're bringing full-blown back, the Sacred Heart of Jesus and so forth into the lab, but there is a sense in which your research really compels us to have to reorganize the way we metaphorically think of the heart. And so I'd just love to hear maybe both of you talk a little bit about what's the role of culture and metaphor in describing and also describing the heart, but also just in practical terms for your research.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in a historical way because I think it leads to what you're doing in this very interesting way. Let's see. Sorry, these are a little out of sync. But I've and my interest in your fields in a historical way. The first heart transplantation, the first artificial heart. We've largely lost touch with how controversial and radical these moments were. And when you, as I have, read not just the official medical description of what happened, but if you go back and read the press, the quotes from the spouses, which I've become very interested in, a history of the first remarks by the spouses after their loved one has come out of surgery with a different heart or a mechanical one. And in these early cases here, in both cases, Mr. Karp and Ms. Washniewski, they asked their husband if they still loved them afterwards. And it sort of feels, oh, that's silly from a scientific point of view, but I think that's missing something about what you're asking, which is the metaphor of the heart matters. And very few people in life have actually had to, for real, ponder if who they are is in their heart, especially a loved one. And so there's a small, especially in this time period, only a handful of people have that experience. And like I said, it's fascinating the questions they ask, simple human questions about age-old problems, about where are you in your body? Do you still love me? Then some ridiculous questions by the press. Mr. Oshkansky had a female heart. So, of course, nobody knew. So the questions asked were, were you going to sit down to go to the bathroom? Like, this is an actual question asked at the press conference. asked him if he was more emotional. Think of the complicated gendered issues in a question like that with the heart. So I've really become a historian about the people who have to live with the consequences of this. Again, it seems silly, but it's not. People really had these questions. Fast forward to today with what you're doing, and a question I've asked you before, and I'm so fascinated is, what are those equivalent moments going to be for the ghost heart? Even the language already, I think, unintentionally or intentionally, you created a new type of metaphor by even calling it a ghost heart. Because of all the connotations that come with that word in this, actually it links perfectly with what you've done. It's the final material step between just disintegration. And it's right at the edge of identity and materiality. And so when the day comes when someone gets the first ghost heart transplant, I think we'll have a similar moment where we'll be forced to reevaluate what we've asked for from our heart metaphors. So anyway, I don't know if you have one to expand on that.
It's really interesting because as we're sitting here talking about this, I'm thinking about how I feel in the lab when I'm dealing with these. And the first time I held a human heart in the operating room, I cried. It was pretty humbling and remarkable, and it's a privilege to do what I do. I don't feel that same way about the scaffold. But when it gets the cells back, I do again.
I've never heard you say that. That's interesting.
I don't think I've ever articulated that until right now. But as soon as it starts being like a heart again, I have my level of respect for it and reverence for it comes back. It's really interesting.
So what does that, like with these questions of, do you still love me? I think those are great moments to ponder, because what does that reveal something innate about the way you've constructed meaning in the body for you? Because when I saw the ghost heart, I had all the emotions. There was an attachment to it.
Right.
Go ahead.
Don't get me wrong, they're beautiful. They're beautiful. And yet I know they're not enough.
But do you have an emotional reaction to heart cells in a dish that aren't in the matrix?
No.
Are they the person?
I mean,
So
I
you need
did the
both.
first time I saw them beat because I went, oh my gosh, these are alive. And the first time I saw a scaffold, I was like, wow, it looks like a heart. And I thought, okay, the heart's a muscle, I can imagine that. But we did the same thing with the liver, and it looked like a liver, and I was like, wow, this is real. And they're beautiful, don't get me wrong. When I see the images and I see the vessels, I'm awestruck by the beauty, but I don't feel the same degree of protectiveness and need to make sure it's okay. And has anybody checked on the heart? How are the hearts? First question I ask in the morning, how are the hearts?
Yeah.
And part of that's because we can keep the scaffolds in the refrigerator and they're fine.
So it's really about storage techniques when it comes right down to it. So we should wrap up soon, but I thought one thing I would really like to do is circle back around to the exhibition a little bit and get us ready to go over to the gallery. And Dario, maybe you could just say a little bit more about how you see all this discussion of the ghost heart relating to all the pulse waves that we've been looking at and thinking about over the past year. Is there a sort of fundamental similarity between the way you see the ghost heart and the way you see these waveforms?
As I like to argue with these images, the first pulse wave ever recorded in the first flat line. Two images we largely take for granted, I think. And I'm really on a mission to get us to in an art historical way, to give them the proper due in the history of image making. Not only are they, like your work, pushing the boundary of sensitivity of materials. This is hair making an in unison pulsing with one's heart, bouncing in soot from a candle flame. It's just it's another type of edge of materiality, but it's also a type of fundamental form in that very rare classification of images that reach near universal understanding, in the sense that you just put a flat line in front of someone and a pulse wave. Generally, we don't need any more prompts. We kind of know life, death. It's somehow got to something basic and fundamental. And in the history of imaging life and death, art historically, even religious iconography, as Jennifer just showed, you put all that on the table, millennia of such interpretations, nothing would have predicted that those would be the next two images that would come up as far as life and death in the history, the human quest to image such things. They're truly radical departures from other ways of doing things. So when I think about the matrix, the ghost heart in the matrix, it's another moment where I feel the edge of materiality has been reached at some level. It's image making, and it's, at least the way I'm interpreting, it's testing the sort of boundary between life and death. And because as my question is, a pure form, whether you have an attachment to the form before the cells go in or not, it's all potential. It's still potential to be alive. And I feel like it gets somewhere similar in our quest to know the heart at some core level.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, before we put cells in, that bottom line is what you would see, and on a good day, when we put cells in, the upper line is what you see. And the bottom line as a human being makes me kind of sick when I see it, right? And I aspire every day to come in and see those pulse waves and go, yes, yes, it's happening. And when I look at the EKG, that's when I know whether or not we've succeeded. So,
well, that's why when that day comes, I want to argue that what Dr. Taylor has done, that image needs to be slotted in. See, don't I have that in here? Oh yeah, that image needs to be slotted in the history of such milestones of imaging the heart. I know this is not where you want it to be yet, but you can explain the...
But it's real. I mean, that's a heart that was dead. We washed all the cells out. We put human cells back in, and you can see we're getting the waveforms, and it responds to drugs, and it's not quite as strong as I want it to be, but it's there, and it's real, and it's alive.
And I think, Dario, so much of your work with the pulse wave is about, and you've talked a lot about this, is about finding the minimal material trace that can be reanimated or reconstructed. So one way of thinking about everything that Dario has done with these graphic pulse wave traces is that he's sort of filled them with stem cells for us and brought them back into something like life, or at least into something that we can recognize, again, to use our heart transplant vocabulary, something that we can recognize today, something that will continue to live, and is sort of a model of memory for you as well.
Yeah, we have different tools of how to bring life back to this form or this data. And like in my work, as you know, each of those pulse waves was someone. Right. History hasn't remembered them. It was not common for the doctors to notate their name. They were generally the poor and sick and freely available patients to test this new technology on. All these people left behind maybe the most intimate thing they could, which is a few images from their heart, their pulse and their heartbeat. And they're just lying in archives all over the world, those early ones, and nobody really remembers them as people. As Jennifer said in the intro, what started as a humanitarian impulse to image disease, inventing cardiology in the process, also inadvertently created the abstraction of the body into medical data, which is totally useful, but it's raised its own problems of removing the person from the data. And so I'm trying to bring back those people the best with the tools that I have. I'm trying to give them life in a similar way, not similar, yours is much more at stake in what you're doing, but a similar gesture of acknowledging the life that's still there, that's possible to bring back out.
Absolutely, and you're doing it beautifully. You're making beautiful, you're making all the parts of the heart except the physical parts, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But that's why working together, I think, can be more complete.
All right, I think that's an excellent place to stop. I cannot thank both of you enough. We could go on. I mean, we only got about halfway through the questions. But we will continue this discussion with all of you in the reception and then in the gallery. So again, the reception is just downstairs in this building. And then when you've had enough recepting, you can make your way over to the gallery or beforehand. It's up to you. And we'll all get a chance to see these pulse waves come to life. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.